Good evening and welcome to another informative Healthy Women, Healthy World educational gathering for 2022. My name is Tracy Helm and I'm a volunteer member of the Healthy Women, Healthy World team. We are thrilled that you have joined us and we welcome both returning and new participants. We are all volunteers committed to learning about and mobilizing champions for women and children impacted by global health issues. We gather quarterly for free educational gatherings just like this one. We are supporters of Medical Teams International, a humanitarian organization providing life-saving care to people in crisis. Our topic this evening is so timely and on all of our minds. The Ukraine humanitarian crisis from citizen to refugee. The terrible war in Ukraine has grabbed the attention of the world. Only 2 months into the crisis, and it is reported that more than 6.5 million Ukrainians are displaced in their own country. A staggering 5.2 million, mostly women and children, have spilled into surrounding countries. People are leaving everything behind in search of safety for their families. All three of our speakers tonight bring so much insight and knowledge to this topic. I can't wait to learn from them. By now, we are all very familiar with Zoom, so very quickly, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen at any time during the program to ask questions of our presenters. We are streaming this webinar on Facebook Live, and we're also recording it so that we can share it with those who are unable to join us, and also to provide you the link to share it with friends after. Finally, we value your input as we continue to improve our virtual events. We'd love it if you would take a minute to complete the short survey that will be available at the end of our program. Let's begin tonight with a moment of reflection, to step back from our daily distractions, to calm and turn our minds towards being together, to share, and to learn from each other. I'd like to share a touching prayer for Ukraine written by Tracy Brown. Prayer and reflection on the war in Ukraine. God of hope and peace, may your love and strength be felt by the people of Ukraine. May it sustain them in their struggles and hold them in their fear. May their long, rich history and culture be protected from annihilation. May new dreams and vision replace the many senseless acts of violence. Show us how to stand in solidarity when Ukrainian cries for freedom go unheard. Teach us to speak prophetic words of peace when justice is out of balance. Help us to stand in solidarity with our hearts, our thoughts, and our actions. Gift us with courage and imagination to help create a more just and loving world. Help us not to turn away from the atrocities, believing them too much to witness. Take from us any fears and replace them with your strength and direction. Grant us the willingness to open our doors to our dear Ukrainian neighbors, giving them safe harbor from the storm of hate. Show us how to love in the midst of hard truths about humanity. We are very fortunate to have three knowledgeable and insightful presenters tonight from around the globe. Each are currently in or have recently been in the crisis region and have witnessed the devastating turmoil that is the Ukrainian refugee disaster. Joe, Dr. Trina, and Martha each bring different perspectives, responses, and stories to our discussion tonight. Our first speaker, Joe Dicarlo, is actually joining us live from the Moldova border, where it is 4:30 in the morning. Joe is a longtime member of Medical Teams International with vast experience in crises around the world as a global ambassador. It is my pleasure to welcome and hand off to Joe.
Thank you, Stacy, for your kind introduction. And I just want to say, prior to my 24 years with Medical Teams, I was in university. My degree was in Russian language and literature. And I worked in Eastern Europe and Russia for 14 years before coming to Medical Teams. So it's a real honor to be back here in Moldova to assist our teams. Next slide, please. First, I want to share some interesting facts about Ukraine. Ukraine is the second largest country in Europe, only behind Russia itself. Ukraine is noted to be the breadbasket of Europe with its rich, flat, fertile lands. And that's even reflected in the Ukrainian flag, the blue and the yellow. The blue represents the blue sky, and the yellow represents the rich wheat fields that are evident in the country. Now, you may be asking, why is President Putin attacking Ukraine? Why is Putin obsessed with this country? You may be wondering, how did we get here? Well, that is what I want to try to answer this evening. In my opinion, there are two main reasons for Russia's actions. The first one is there are historical ties between Ukraine and Russia that Russia is using to justify this horrific war. And secondly, I believe, it is my opinion, that Vladimir Putin wants to reestablish the Russian Empire as part of his legacy. So let's start looking at the historical ties between the two countries. And I might add, this is very simple and very quick historical lesson. Next slide, please. In the 9th century, the Kievan Rus Empire was established with Kiev as its capital. These are Slavic people, which includes Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians. So they draw their lineage from this Slavic state. Next slide, please. For most of its history, Ukraine was always under the rule of Russia. Both Russia and Ukraine were Soviet republics in the Soviet Union. Ukraine had a defense industry, a large agricultural industry, and a nuclear defensive arsenal. This is very important that you remember this. Next slide, please. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed when both Russia and Ukraine became independent countries. Next slide. In 1994, Ukraine gave up all its nuclear weapons to Russia in what was called the Budapest Memorandum. This was signed by Russia, Ukraine, the United States, United Kingdom, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. And it was designed to have, instead of having several states now becoming nuclear powers, all their nuclear weapons were given back to Russia. With the guarantee, Ukraine gave their nuclear weapons away with the guarantee of Ukraine's security and sovereignty. Next slide, please. In 2023, President Viktor Yanukovych of Ukraine was noted for being a heavy-handed ruler, corrupt, and most importantly, pro-Moscow. He rejected a EU trade deal. He signed a $15 billion bailout with Russia. And this was against the people's wishes. They wanted the trade deal with the EU. And this caused massive protests, which resulted in Yanukovych's ouster from power in 2014 and exile to Russia. As a response to that, Russia annexed Crimea. They took the Crimea from Ukraine. I will say, interestingly, in 1954, Khrushchev gave Crimea to Ukraine as a gesture of brotherhood between Russia and Ukraine. So Ukraine was part of, Crimea was part of Russia, and in 1954 it was given to Ukraine. But that was when they were both the same country, Soviet Union. Now for Russia to try to claim the Crimea as its own territory after 68 years as part of Ukraine is ridiculous. No other government sees this as legitimate. It would be as if Russia wanted to reclaim Alaska back from the United States after selling it to the US in 1867. Next slide, please. In the same year, Russia started supporting the Russian-speaking rebels in eastern Ukraine. Now you may be wondering, why are there so many Russians in this part of Ukraine? Well, that too was by design, and we need to look at history again. In 1700, Catherine the Great sent Russians to the region to Russify the area. Russian language was the only language taught in schools, and by 1800, the Ukrainian language was banned in Ukraine. In 1930, Stalin orchestrated a famine in Ukraine where millions of Ukrainians died. Remember, this was the breadbasket of Europe. Stalin sent Russians to resettle in eastern Ukraine. But I want to stress, even though there are Russian speakers in Ukraine, that does not mean that they are pro-Russia. Next slide, please. In 2019, Vladimir Zelensky overwhelmingly was elected as president with 73% of the vote. I'm going to say we're a little ahead on the slides. Zelensky wants to keep Ukraine as an independent country, able to determine its own destiny. Now, Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, wants to revive the Russian imperialism. He considered the breakup of the Soviet Union as, quote, the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the last century. Another way of saying this, Russia alone is a country. Russia with Ukraine is an empire. Next slide, please. So we now know what happened on February 24th. Russia invaded Ukraine and the world changed. Largest movement of people in Europe since World War II. More than 5 million Ukrainians have crossed into neighboring countries. An additional 6 million people, has been stated, are displaced within Ukraine. The neighboring countries are under stress and in need of assistance in meeting the needs of a large refugee population, as does the Western Ukraine area, where there are millions displaced, including medical care, mental health programming, which is what medical teams is currently doing in Moldova. Next slide, please. And I want to say medical teams is not new to the region. We actually were registered in Moldova. In 1997, we established a partnership with Chisinau, which is now called Chisinau Bible Church. And we worked with orphanages and Gift of Hope teams, providing gifts, volunteers coming to provide gifts to the orphans during Christmas time. In 2000, medical teams registered as Coram Deo, a branch office of medical teams in Portland. We refurbished the burn unit at Chisinau Hospital. We deployed massage therapy teams, physical therapy teams, medical teams, and Gift of Hope teams. And towards the programming, we also provided EMS, Emergency Medical Services training in Transnistria. And then in 2016, 2017, we completed our work, and Coram Deo continued under its own registration. When the war broke out, we immediately went to Coram Deo to revive that partnership, and medical teams immediately sent $15,000 to assist Coram Deo with the purchase and distribution of hygiene products and medicines to incoming Ukrainian refugees. In this slide, we see the director of Coram Deo, Victor Dari, his assistant, as well as our own Sarah Phillips and Dr. Trina Helderman. Victor, the director, gives us a recorded message for you this evening.
Hi, my name is Victor, and the director of Coram Deo. I and my team, volunteers, wanted to thank you for your generous contribution to the Ukrainian refugees. Your support is much needed and appreciated. We are able to buy hygiene products, diapers, and medicines for women and children. Thank you, and God bless you.
I also want to acknowledge our partnership with the Ukrainian American Cultural Center of Oregon and Southwest Washington. This is a long-standing, valuable partner. And after the war began, together we sent a 40-foot container filled with life-saving medical supplies that were received and distributed inside the Ukraine. We value all our partnerships. This work cannot be done in isolation. We are medical teams, and that's what we do best. And now I would like to pass this on to Dr. Trina Helderman to share more about the work of medical teams in Moldova. Dr. Trina, off to you.
Thanks, Joe. So my name is Trina Helderman, and I'm one of the global health advisors for Medical Teams International. I've been doing humanitarian work for about 13 years and was on an emergency response team for 5 years before I came to medical teams 2 years ago, just around the time that COVID started. And currently within my portfolio, I support Colombia, Guatemala, and the Uganda programs. And just a few weeks ago, I was on the first in team in Moldova with the rest of the humanitarian response team. Next slide. So I'd like to talk with you about the projects that we're currently doing. So we have a project started in Moldova where we are working in partnership. Again, as Joe mentioned, we are trying to work in partnership with those who are already supporting and the partners who are already supporting the refugees that are there in Moldova. We have volunteer doctors and nurses who are providing medical care in what we call refugee accommodation centers. These are sometimes schools, churches, camps that are hosting refugees, not necessarily places that were originally designed for that, but different churches, civil society organizations have opened the doors and are providing places for accommodation. They provide food, and then they have asked us to come alongside to provide health screenings and also medical care for the refugees that are there. Some of this is identifying medical problems that perhaps need to have referrals to another facility or to a hospital. It's also possible that we might just give them medications that we have from our own supplies. This is in partnership with Emmanuel Medical Center, which is a private health center that is in Chisinau. They also have another facility in Palanca, and they have been working in partnership with the refugee accommodation centers to provide some basic medical supplies, but had requested us to come alongside to ensure that we have doctors and nurses available on a regular basis in these facilities. In addition to that, in Moldova, we are also providing training. Next slide. The training is to the frontline workers, so to the Border Patrol men and women who are receiving the refugees as they come across the border. We heard many stories from them of people coming somewhat hysterical. They've had some people who have collapsed as soon as they arrived at the border due to the stress of finally getting out. And so we, in partnership with both IOM, so the International Organization for Migration, and with the Border Patrol department there within Moldova, have been providing training on medical first aid, trauma first aid, and also psychological first aid. And these are just a few tools to help them to be able to provide just some basic, sometimes even life-saving care as people initially come across the border and before they're actually able to get into a place where they would have medical services. Next slide. In addition to that, we are continuing to look at different partnerships in Ukraine. We have one partnership that had already been identified, and we'll be working with them to ship in some additional supplies. As Joe mentioned, we've already been working with other partners like the Ukraine American Cultural Association, where we've shipped 26 pallets into Ukraine through their partnership. In Ukraine, one of the things that we've identified is that, similar to in Moldova, we have these shelters where the refugees may be staying. These are people who've been displaced from the eastern part of Ukraine and have had to move over into the western side, seeking shelter from the conflict and from the violence. Many of these are just, again, local hosting agencies, Ukrainian organizations. And so we are looking to partner with them, similar to in Moldova, and providing medical care and medical screening. However, we're still also looking at different partnerships with health facilities and with clinics to identify where the needs are most critical. But we are recognizing that as the dynamics of the conflict change, that the dynamics of where the need is also changing. So whether that's going to be a stronger need in Moldova versus in different parts of Ukraine, we're continuing to monitor that situation, to be in coordination meetings, and to try to identify where our services are most critical. Next slide. And just to show again, these are from our warehouse. So this picture is from our warehouse in Tigard, where we had put together the 26 pallets that were going with the Ukraine American Cultural Association. And I was just there a couple of days ago and saw that there are additional pallets that are being put together right now with our volunteers that will later go out to Ukraine in a container shipment. So we are thankful for the volunteers who are packing those, for the donations that we've been receiving, and hopefully we'll be able to get those out to Ukraine soon. Next slide. One thing that I would like to highlight is the sheer size and scale of this conflict and what that's done in terms of refugees. So this is from a UNHCR report from back in March, where it looked at over the course of a year, the number of refugees who had fled from some of the biggest crises. And so if we look at Venezuela from 2017 to 2018, they're in the top left corner, 2.9 million people fled from Venezuela. However, in contrast to that, we have Ukraine, which at this stage, within 2 months, we've had over 5.2 million people who have fled. So looking at that time period and the size and the scale of the number of refugees, it's just been quite overwhelming for all of the countries who are hosting the refugees and trying to support them. If you think about Moldova, one of the big challenges for them is they're a country with a population of only about 2.4 million people. And so having an extra 400,000, 500,000 people that come into the country is a very big deal. And they don't have a whole lot of buffer to be able to care and provide services for these refugees. So just thinking of the size and scale is quite tremendous. Next slide. One other thing just to keep in mind is how this might be affecting other places as well. So Joe had mentioned that Ukraine was the breadbasket of the world. And one of the things that had been happening prior to this crisis is a lot of the grains that we are using for refugees in places like Uganda, in Somalia, in Ethiopia are coming from Ukraine. So there's a real concern that we had previously a bit of a food crisis, if you will, in East Africa due to the locusts maybe you'd heard about previously and climate change and drought. And so one of the big concerns that we have is that the Ukraine crisis is also spilling out to have other effects, such as worsening perhaps that food security crisis, because we won't be able to access the fields and the crops from Ukraine like we typically would. One other thing that this is affecting is the other refugee crises around the world. So this is taken from UNHCR from 2021 and looking at the number of refugees that we had globally. So there are over 28 million refugees, I believe, globally in 2021, and that number is rising year upon year. And if you look at the countries that were hosting refugees, 68% of those refugees back in 2021 were coming from Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar. And one of the shifts that we now see with Ukraine is that in Ukraine, the number is already at 5.2 million. So if we see that fits in just below Syria as being one of the major refugee crises globally and kind of offsets some of the other refugee responses, this also could mean that there's limited funding available for those other refugees because there's a new need, a very large need for refugees that are coming out of Ukraine. As medical teams, we are committed to supporting people who've been displaced from conflict and refugees. And so just wanted to highlight that not only are we working in Ukraine, but if you look at these other major crises, so in Venezuela, there's 4.1 million refugees, and many of them have gone to Colombia, where medical teams is currently working, providing health services and community health projects to support the refugees there. And likewise, South Sudan, 2.2 million. We don't see Democratic Republic of Congo on here, but they are making up refugee population in Uganda. And we have over 1 million refugees that we're supporting in Uganda with health and nutrition services, as well as community health projects. So just highlighting that medical teams is very committed to refugees and the plight that they've had to face from conflict and having to flee And just recognizing that the challenges that they face, leaving home, even at, at a sudden notice. I remember when I was in Moldova, there was one family that noted they had just sat down for dinner and the food had been served, and then someone called them and said, hey, we're going to evacuate now. If you're coming, we need to go like right now. You have like 2 minutes. And so the family got up from the table and they went and grabbed a few things and got in the car and fled. And, think of this as the case for perhaps millions of people who are in new countries facing new challenges. And we are attempting as medical teams to reduce at least some of those stresses with ensuring that they have access to healthcare, and also hoping to expand in Moldova and into Ukraine with some mental health and psychosocial support services. And with that, I believe next slide, I believe, pass on to Martha. Yes. So Martha, you're free to take over. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Trina. And just try to make sure that I'm assuming if you can't hear me that you'll let me know. I just first of all want to thank everyone for joining this call. Thank you for your interest in what's happening in Ukraine and the Ukrainians themselves and medical teams. So I'm Martha Holly Newsom. I'm the president and CEO of Medical Teams. Been here for about 5.5 years as the time has flown, and my career of 30 years has really been focused on public health, international development, and making sure that people have access to healthcare. So as I get started here, I, like Dr. Trina and Joe, who's in Moldova, now had the privilege of being able to visit our team just recently, and traveled to Moldova along with Carmen, a member of our marketing and development team. And they, both Dr. Trina and Joe, have talked about our programming. And so I was able to see the work that we're doing and visit 2 of those refugee accommodation centers, get to the border and see the training that we're doing with Border Patrol guards. And then have a chance to meet our partners, Emmanuel Christian Medical Center, and meet with some of our State Department folks that had just arrived in Moldova, as well as a former Deputy Minister of Health in Moldova. So as I get started here, I just want to start with this one quote that was from one of the refugees that Carmen and I sat down to talk to. But really, this quote echoes the feeling that I had after talking to 3 refugee families. And that is just a sense of disbelief, the fact that they didn't believe that this could happen to them, the utter shock that all of the refugees felt. And I really think that there was almost a sense of betrayal as well, because as Joe has helped us to understand, the history of Russia and Ukraine has been intertwined for so long. And there's such a sense of families having ties across into Russia. And so that shared history makes this attack particularly painful. The other thing that I want to highlight is just the sense of that this is a women's crisis, that these 5 million people that have fled have largely been women and children. In fact, 90% of them are women and children. And that now a country as large as 43 million, that 1 in 4 Ukrainians have either been displaced internally or have fled across the border. So that's incredible levels of displacement in such a quick amount of time. And so as Dr. Trina has shown us, that's within a very short window of time up to the levels that we saw from the Syrian conflict. And that happened much more slowly than this particular conflict has. Part of the reason that so many women and children have fled is because there's military conscription. And so the men aged 18 to 60 have had to stay behind to fight. There is, we learned, a policy that if a family has 3 kids, that the man can go across with his wife and children and flee as well. But many of them have stayed to fight, even though they would be allowed across. And so you can just imagine how much just devastating separation this has caused for families, and a sense of guilt, I think, for some of the folks that have made it to safety, but are completely anxious and fearful about what's happening to their husbands and to the men and family members who've been left in Ukraine to fight. So really sobering situation. With that, I wanted to show you just what it looks like, what one of these refugee accommodation centers looks like. And I arrived right before Easter, and so there was a beautiful painting there that also kind of was very, very poignant to think about preparations for our Easter. Of course, they were preparing for the Orthodox Easter. And these women in the picture represent a group of Anyas, which was very personal for me because my daughter's name is Anya. And so one of the volunteers sent me this picture, just said, oh, we've got all these Anyas that have been helping to run the center. And the other thing that really struck me about the refugee accommodation centers is that all of the refugees themselves were helping. They were cooking and cleaning and serving. And so there was such a sense of solidarity amongst the refugees that they all wanted to help each other and were literally running the centers themselves with a lot of their own manpower, which of course enabled the center of 350 refugees to function very smoothly. So with that bit of context of understanding what the Refugee Accommodation Center looks like, I want to share a little bit about the story that Carmen and I heard from Marina that you can see on the screen. She is a 39-year-old nurse, and she has two boys, Igor, who's 5, and Vlad, who's 14. And she fled into Moldova with her mother as well, Nina, who is 71 years old. So a lot of, she's shouldering a lot as a single mom. And you can, I think, see from the picture that she just radiates this gentle spirit and optimism and generosity. And as Carmen and I heard her story, there were several times that her eyes just filled with tears as she's just caring so much. So she, as a nurse, is also helping out. And so she is coming alongside our volunteers and serving the fellow refugees and helping out the medical volunteers that are there. She wanted people to know outside of Ukraine and to understand her situation, and said that she wants everybody to know that they're just like us, that as we help them and as we seek to support what's happening, that they are people just like you and I, and that she says that everyone doesn't think that this will happen to them, but it did happen, and they are continuing to reel from what they have lost. Their dreams have been killed. And she said, I wonder what will happen next. Who will help me? And I find hope in seeing many people in Moldova and around the world who are reaching out to help us. As I go forward, you see the picture of Igor there and of Marina serving and that tiny little clinic that's really the size of a closet. And I just wanted to share a few more of her words. And again, she says, we refugees are the same as everyone else. I wish people were more sensible towards refugees and would help them out. Understand that every refugee feels alone. Many people's futures are broken. We live in uncertainty. I don't know what will happen next. What else? Our dreams, our hopes are killed, and it's difficult to live every day only thinking of just getting through the day, thinking of how to stay secure, asking what will happen next, who will help you. Someone may be unkind to you. Of course, the main wish is that this war stops. And this takes the effort of every country in the world, not only the UN. Marina went on to muse about the political problems at the heart of this war and continues to say, everyone thinks it's not going to happen to me. It might happen in Iraq or other countries. Nobody thought it would happen in Ukraine. And there's some joke that we only protect ourselves, and it's not true. Everyone in Ukraine has relatives in Russia and Russia in Ukraine. What's the purpose of fighting? I think there's more serious problems involved here. It's not about nationality. It's a problem, a conflict between two continents, but we are suffering instead. I very much want to go home. So after I left, Carmen was able to go back to the Baldata Refugee Center and find out what had happened to Marina. She asked where she was and learned that she had taken a very long and arduous journey to Bulgaria. In fact, got stuck in Romania by mistake, but eventually, like 24 hours later, managed to get to Bulgaria. And there you see a picture of her two boys in Bulgaria. And so Carmen was able to Google translate text back and forth with her and ask her how she was doing. And she said, as long as people help, there's resilience. And she closed that text message with, I really want to be safe. At which point Carmen said she wanted her to be safe too. And I believe that's the sentiment of all of us on the call. We all want every single refugee to be safe. So I just want to thank you for being here, for listening, for caring, for hearing Marina's story. And let's continue to pray for peace, for a quick end to the war, and for every refugee that faces an uncertain future, like Marina, Nina, and her two boys. I'll hand back to our Healthy Woman, Healthy World folks.
Hey, wow. What terrific presentations and sharing from Joe, Dr. Trina, and Martha. We are so appreciative. We can move into our Q&A time. Please add your questions into the Q&A button section, and we'll start asking. So we'll have all three speakers join us, and then we'll just direct questions as they come up to each one. Okay, so I think the first question will be for Joe. Joe, when you meet with the Moldovans, what is their reaction to this crisis? Do they fear attack from Russia?
Yes, I would say that anxiety has increased in the last week or so because of the bombings that have taken place in Transnistria. There is speculation as to who was the cause of those bombings. But you have to realize that Transnistria it's a breakaway region of Moldova. It's unofficial. It's not recognized by any country as an independent country. But they get their natural gas they're able to stay independent by getting their natural gas from Russia. And they get support as well, monetary support from Russia. And so with these bombings, there's also been in Transnistria the recruitment of men from 18 to 55 to prepare for anything that may occur in Transnistria into their army. And as well as we heard yesterday, that people trying to leave the region, Transnistria, the roads were blocked, so people were unable to come into Moldova. So I would say that anxiety has been elevated a bit, and there's lots of conversations among Moldovans about their vulnerabilities. Good question.
Okay. These kind of questions always get me, so you guys will have to give me a minute. I have a 10-year-old in my house, but we have a 10-year-old in the chat named Amy, who's from Portland. And she wants to know how she can help children refugees from Ukraine. So I don't know who has an answer for that one, but if one of the three of you have any ideas, I think Amy would love to hear them.
Well, maybe I'll take a stab. That is a tearjerker. So thank you, Amy, for your question, for your concern for the children of Ukraine. I think there's a couple different ways of getting involved. One is you're here learning and listening, and that's incredible. So thank you for that. Of course, there's so many charities that are responding and looking for support, medical teams and the partners that we're working with at Quorum Deo, as Joe talked about. And so, but I think also educating your friends and your peers to what's happening is a wonderful role that you can play in getting the word out that they're just like us, that they want to know that we care, that we're praying for them, that we're following what's happening, and that we're not going to forget. I think there's, as these crises go on, I think the refugees that are fleeing and those that are displaced in Ukraine feel like the world's going to just move on to other things and forget about them. So I think we can all continue to pray and to support in different ways that make sense. And maybe your family can chat about what's an appropriate response for your parents and for you.
Thank you, Martha. That was fabulous. Dr. Trina, let's send this one to you. How would you characterize the worldwide humanitarian response in the crisis areas that you observed? Is it chaotic? Is it organized? Is it effective? How would you describe it?
Sure. So I will preface this with saying I was on the first end team. So I landed with two other colleagues from medical teams, and we actually arrived in Moldova before the UNHCR team did. So the UN High Commission for Refugees. And so that just gives you a little bit of a sense of at where things were at that time and how things probably are a bit now. But I would say one of the things that is remarkable about this crisis is the sheer amount of volunteerism and local churches and charities and organizations and youth stepping up and doing everything that they can to provide services. And that's not just in Moldova, but the team also was in Poland, in Romania, and saw very similar things. And so that is an incredible response, but it also comes with a few challenges in that there wasn't necessarily a centralized place where decisions were being made about where should the new arrivals go, how should we arrange transport. And so very incredible use of resources that people had, but at the same time, probably a bit less efficient than it could have been if there was more of a centralized coordination. I think now we see coordination meetings happening on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. They have coordination meetings in general, and then also for each of the different sectors. So there's a meeting for health and nutrition. There's a meeting for mental health and psychosocial services. There are meetings for protection, particularly in Moldova. And then in Ukraine, there's probably about 10 subsector health specialty working groups that are trying to address different issues. So there's trauma, chronic illnesses like diabetes, hypertension. You have one looking at child health, reproductive health. So there is a lot of effort to coordinate the different actors who are responding to ensure that the critical supplies get to the right places. And then also ensuring that certain international funding that's coming through into what's called like a pooled fund are going to the critical places as well, where that is most needed. So I would say it is probably a bit more organized, to be honest, than in some of the responses that I've been in. And I do think that needs are being addressed as well as possible, but recognizing it's a huge conflict. Ukraine is a large country. The difficulties with the dynamics of the conflict and moving supplies and people and evacuating people has been quite complicated. And so as much you can coordinate that and try to do that effectively, you can't control all of the variables that are working within the conflict. So, yeah.
Wow. Thank you. That was an amazing overview, because I think those of us who are a few steps back from the conflict, we forget that life does go on and all those chronic illnesses still need to be addressed, and particularly family planning that you mentioned. I think that's something that we don't always think about, that still needs to be dealt with, even though other crises are there. So thank you for that. Martha, this one is for you. In your esteemed career in so many difficult crises around the world, how is this one different and how is it the same?
That's a great question. So one of the surprising aspects for me in arriving in Moldova and visiting our team and seeing what was happening on the ground is this is Europe. So it sort of feels like you're arriving in France or in Georgia or one of, a European country. And so I think what's different is the crises that I have experienced or seen or been part of haven't been in Europe. So it looks a little different. And the other thing that was surprising and different about this crisis is that so many people have taken refugees into their homes. I just found that incredibly heartwarming. I mean, even the former deputy minister of health had people saying it. I mean, I don't feel like I talked to anyone that hadn't taken additional people into their homes. So that is quite unique. You don't always see that happening. I think there's such a sense of solidarity with the Ukrainians in this crisis and such a willingness to help. So you don't see big camps. You don't see Moldova has absorbed 100,000 refugees that are still there, that tiny, tiny little country of 2.4 or 2.5 million people, but only 2,000 are in these centers. And the centers are more transit. People are trying to get into other countries, trying to get connected with relatives, like Marina trying to get to Bulgaria. And so I think those are some of the differences. Some of the similarities is the shock, the story that Dr. Trina told, that people just literally had to make these life-changing decisions overnight and in minutes, hours, grab what they had and flee. I remember we asked Marina, what she had brought with her and, what did she have to kind of remind her of home? And she got all teary-eyed because she couldn't bring too many photos and she had left her old phone that had all her pictures on it. So, that's the kind of stuff that is the same. These refugees have gone through so much loss and that pain goes with them.
Yeah, thank you. That was a beautiful response. Joe, I think this one might be for you. Can you speak to how medical teams monitors the safety and security situation for staff and volunteers in Moldova? What are medical teams' contingency plans if Moldova and Transnistria are drawn into the conflict?
That's an excellent question, Lance. I would say, first of all, we take the security and the safety of our staff and volunteers very seriously. And that, as a matter of fact, I'm right now in a town called Cahul, which is near the southern border with Romania and Moldova. And with the volunteers, we've been providing some training on what Dr. Trina had mentioned, the psychological first aid, wound care, and CPR training for the Border Patrol. Before we leave, we let someone know on staff whose job is it to receive this information that we're leaving the office. And then we drive down to Cahul 3.5 hours later, we notify them again. So we notify our movements around the country where we are. We have a security officer that's also monitoring the situation in the area in Moldova and around Moldova. Not only the security, but if things start to erupt in Odessa, we need to know, we need to be prepared. That would be a trigger for more mass movements of people into Moldova from Odessa. And so, so that's another area of observation. If we see armaments starting to move into Transnistria, those are be obvious triggers for us. And what's being developed now are evacuation routes or emergency departure routes for staff and volunteers. So we're not on high alert, but we're being very cautious and very careful, and we're planning. So hopefully it won't be needed, but we need to know what to do, and we're briefed daily so that we know how to get out if we need to.
It's a lot of planning. Thank you for speaking to that. Okay. So many good questions in here. Are most of those going through Moldova passing through, or are they staying? And let's couple with that. How many Ukrainian refugees are we anticipating arriving in the U.S.? I don't know. Martha, is that you or Dr. Trina? Which?
I know, it's like we're looking at each other going, who wants to answer that one? Dr. Trina, you want to answer that one? No? Okay, over to me. Most of the refugees are not staying in Moldova. And that's because of Transnistria, the situation that Joe described. And it's Moldova's the poorest country in Europe. It's not part of NATO, and it's not part of Europe. So it's seen as being a bit more vulnerable, having less resources. So people can get into another country they're trying to go. They're trying to continue if they can. And then, of course, we've got close to 7 million Ukrainians who've been displaced inside of Ukraine. And those ones are probably less well off, older, don't have the means to get out. So it's kind of like it graduates into those who had the most means, got out first, and then most connections. And then the ones that are left behind probably may not have, they might be older and less able to travel. So they are trying to move through Moldova and get somewhere else. And then let's see, how many refugees are coming to the US? My understanding is that the Biden administration has given a special allotment of 100,000 Ukrainians that can come in. And that's completely above and an additional amount to what the normal annual refugee limit is. So that's the number that we know of right now. It'd be interesting to see if that gets increased, but it's 100,000 is my understanding. I'm seeing heads nodding. So. And that means actually, back to the question, that means that there could be Ukrainians coming to Oregon, to Washington, to other states of our participants who've joined us. And so back to Claire's question, we may be able to help some of the Ukrainians that make their way to our community here, or wherever here is for you.
Yeah. I just wanted to add as well, what I realized in my conversations with refugees, Ukrainian refugees, is the agonizing decisions that they have to make, because many of them have left spouses behind. Do they move on to another country? Do they stay where they are in the hopes of maybe going back? The word I keep hearing is they're ashamed that they had left their loved one, and that they had left the Ukraine. And so to travel onward is very difficult for them. So it gives you a sense of the dire needs that they have if they have to leave. Feel safe.
For sure. To kind of dovetail into that, this question seems pertinent. With folks taking refugees into their homes, how are they managing the food and other needs? And how long do they anticipate they will be having these guests? It's so incredible they are doing this. And since we may also have that opportunity coming up, I think that question seems really relevant. And Dr. Trina, I don't know if you feel comfortable. We haven't heard from you in a minute.
Sure, I can I can try to make a bit of an educated guess. So they say that most refugees, generally speaking, most refugees, if they've had to flee from their country, they may flee for up to 20 years. 20 years. So even if the conflict would subside for various different reasons and things that happen, a lot of refugees don't go home very quickly. With the Ukrainian refugees, it's quite hard to say. We don't know the dynamics of the conflict, how long it will last. Even when I was there, I saw people on the southern border who had fled and they were going back home to get more things, to bring more relatives, or perhaps just to go back because they felt, as Joe was saying, they felt ashamed that they had left. So it's quite difficult to know how long they may be staying in one place or another. Those that are transiting through Moldova, when I was there, most people weren't staying more than a few days. So they were coming into Moldova, sleeping, getting some food, having some time to regather their thoughts and try to think about, okay, like, where should I go? Like, do I have family? I know a lot of people were very concerned about language. You know, if they only speak Ukrainian, should I go to Germany where nobody speaks Ukrainian? Should I go to France? You know, where should I go? And so I think having a few days to try to, you know, process through everything that has happened a bit quickly and then to move on. But I would imagine that, you know, it could be months to years that the refugees are away from home. And it may be that someone might need to stay with someone for a short time until they're able to, you know, move out on their own. And it really just depends on what kind of resources they have. You know, did they have resources when they came, or did they have to run quite quickly? And actually, they don't really have, you know, the financial resources to, you know, rent an apartment or to get a new house. And so those are some of the things that organizations like UNHCR and others are providing, you know, multi-purpose cash, for example, so that if people didn't come with those types of resources, they can use that to, you know, purchase the things they need, the clothes. You know, there were shopping malls in Moldova. So it's not like people need us to give, you know, a donation to give them some things, but, you know, actually giving them the money to have that dignity to be able to go get the things that they need, and to be able to take care of themselves. So not an easy question to know how long they might be staying. And, you know, I think the question was, how are they having the resources, you know, for food and whatnot? Some of that, like I said, are through money donations, if you will, given to the refugees themselves. But I think also just the charity of and kindness of neighbors and friends and, you know, different churches and people supporting and saying, you know, similar to, you know, someone has a baby in the United States and they do a meal train and they're like, you know, suddenly you have new dynamics. And so we're going to set up meals coming to your house every day for the next week. And so I would imagine there's similar things like that are happening from neighbors and others who are just trying to help and support those people that are housing the refugees.
Thank you. That was an excellent answer to a very complicated question. Martha, Ken is wondering, can we talk a little bit about what is the work that we're doing in Poland?
That's a great question. And we're actually not working in Poland. So our first in team went through Poland. They landed in Poland first, and there were so many partner agencies there, so that the sense was that there were enough humanitarian actors on the ground. And so that first in team then went to Romania, assessed the situation there. And that's how we got to Moldova, actually, was a sense that Moldova had the greatest need for medical teams. And as Joe talked about, we also had those historic ties and had links to our partners there. So that was a logical place for us to go, but also a sense of where medical support was going to be most needed, that it was a country with the least amount of resource and the least amount of humanitarian actors. I didn't even realize, Dr. Trina, that we got there before the UN. So that's pretty, or at least UN High Commissioner for Refugees. So that's kind of amazing. So it was a little bit forgotten. You know, so many refugees fled into Poland. So it got a lot of international attention. where some of these other countries have not, like Slovakia, Moldova, some of the smaller ones.
Thank you. And this one, I think, Dr. Trina, might be a good one for you. How long does it take for supplies from MTI Tigrid to get to Moldova and Ukraine? And are they being airshipped? And when does the next shipment go out?
Yes, I will try to answer that a bit. So we have different ways that we're getting supplies into Moldova and Ukraine. So some of it is actually local procurement from local suppliers, particularly in Moldova, because those suppliers are still active and functioning. And by purchasing from them, we save on a lot of transport costs, but also we're helping to build the economy there locally in Moldova. So some of the supplies we're getting from there, some are through other international partners. So Medical Teams is part of the Integral Alliance, and there is an organization within Integral that provides basically like kits of medical supplies that they send out for emergencies. And so some of those kits, I understand, arrived today in Moldova from, I believe, the UK. And those were going to be used by the doctors and nurses providing medical care in the accommodation centers. And then the large shipments, so the containers and the pallets, those are going to be going either by air. Well, actually, they're probably going to be going by air because unfortunately the sea option, so going by boat, is not available because the ports going into Moldova are closed. And that's how we had sent supplies previously when Medical Teams used to work in Moldova. And so now having to go with smaller pallets and putting those on air freight. And so those, I mean, I would imagine they probably only take a few days actually by flying, but it's also a lot more expensive. And so that is one of the challenges with shipping the supplies from Tigard is the costs are a lot more, though the supplies have been donated. And so we're using a combination of multiple things to try to ensure that we have sufficient supplies, and then also for the supplies that we're donating directly into Ukraine.
Okay. Wow. Thank you. It's all very involved. Let me see. The question I wanted disappeared. So I'm going to see if I can find it. If not, we're going to move on. We did that one. We did that one. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, Dr. Trina, how about this one? Have you noticed a need for dental care in the refugee population?
I personally have not noticed the need, but what I would say is that they need all the typical health services that you would need. So life, I think somebody said, life kind of goes on. And so, the cavities and fillings and getting your dental cleaning, those types of things, like people will still need that, even though they're refugees. And so to know any sort of like elevated level of dental care, that was not something that I have seen, but just noting that, for medical checkups and dental care and eye care and all of those things will be things that the refugees will need at some point as they're coming out. I would say, kind of a side tangent, some of the things that are a bit unusual to an emergency response of requests have been ongoing chemotherapy. So patients who are cancer patients who've had to evacuate and needing to be referred to particular hospitals or facilities where they can get ongoing chemotherapy, and also insulin. So a lot of people with diabetes and no longer able to go and get their insulin at local pharmacies, or they couldn't bring it, or those of you who maybe are even diabetic know insulin usually has to be kept in a refrigerator. So not even having access to store it. And so, yeah, all of those kind of standard things that people come with in terms of medical needs are still there, even though they cross the border.
That makes sense. Okay, I think we should make this last one the last question, Martha, I'm going to kind of combine these last two questions, send them your way. People are asking about funding. Is funding coming in the way that is needed and is necessary to support these relief efforts? And what's the best way to give?
Oh, love that question. So first off, I'm sure that there's many on the call that have already given. And so I just want to thank you for your generosity. We have just been blown away by the generosity of our community and supporters. And so I want to thank everyone for that. And of course, we are still assessing needs. So donations can still be given for a Ukraine response. You can go to medicalteams.org to do that. One of the big, with the assessment, really where we are right now is looking to how can we help inside of Ukraine, where it's going to be far more expensive to operate just the insurance for our staff, for example, because it's an active conflict, is really, really expensive. So we're really in the midst of assessing what the budget needs will be as we start to work cross-border in Ukraine. So don't have a full handle on that yet. So again, I appreciate the generosity of our huge medical team globally, and thank you all for your support.
All right, thank you so much. Sadly, it is time to end our discussion and wrap up. We are immensely grateful for our speakers this evening, Joe, Dr. Trina, Martha. Thank you so much for either getting up early or staying up late and sharing your time and invaluable insights and knowledge with us. To our audience, we'd love to see you again. Please mark your calendars. Join us for these upcoming Healthy Women, Healthy World events. Our book club will meet on Wednesday, May 18th at 7 p.m. We will discuss I Am a Girl from Africa, a memoir of empowerment, community, and hope. It's a fabulous book. I read it. I love it. You are warmly invited to Medical Team International's signature evening, Field of Dreams in Seattle on June 4th. We're so excited to gather in person again and be on the baseball field at T-Mobile Park. This event will include both an online and live auction, dinner, and inspiring speakers. In July, we will be hosting our annual summer movie in person. More details coming. And finally, we are thrilled to announce that acclaimed author and Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Cheryl Wudunn will be our keynote speaker at the Healthy Women, Healthy World Luncheon on September 22nd. You won't want to miss that one. Get more details and register for these events on our website, medicalteams.org/HWHW. And we'd love for you to share the stories you've heard today with your friends and social networks. Be sure to look out for a follow-up email tomorrow with relevant links and suggestions for ways that you can take action. Also, a short survey will pop up at the inclusion of tonight's program. We value and appreciate your comments to improve our events. Thank you for taking 2 to 3 minutes to help us improve. We truly hope you found this evening informative, encouraging, and worthwhile. We will leave you with this beautiful performance of the Prayer of Ukraine by the Kiev Symphony Chorus. Good night, everyone, and thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us.